the Imperial fists, Praetorian of terror, the vigilant, the unyielding one.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Fluffhammer. Today we have Rogal Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, a model I've been really excited to paint, and I hope you guys like the process. So we're going to start with the sub-assemblies. I've decided to build the entire kind of torso of the model. I've added the shoulder pads on, but I've left the backpack, the cloak, the head, his both hands and the chain axe completely separate. I just think this gives us much more access to the backs of the model, and I've also left the bolt gun off his hip. The bolt gun on his hip, it does just sit there, so actually I've been really careful and stuck a little pin in it, and I'm going to pin it directly to his waist at the end of the process. And then I've magnetized his base as well, so that can ping on and off of the display base. You'll find a little video for that in my YouTube Shorts feed, if you care to give it a look. First stage, we're going to be doing the gold armour. So it's been sprayed Retributor armour spray all over, and we're just going to go straight in with Reikland Fleshshade gloss. The reason we're going for the gloss instead of the standard Reikland Fleshshade is that this one will tend to have a little bit less surface tension, so that means it will go more into the recesses. And instead of actually dulling down the gold too much, the gloss will actually bring a nice shine to the gold, and it'll keep it nice and bright. So just do as neat as you can, work it all over. Make sure and don't forget the chainsaw, the hands and the backpack as well at the same time. And then we're going to give that about half an hour to dry, and we're going to go back in with Reikland Fleshshade gloss and pick some of the deeper recesses and just try and get a much more kind of contrasted look to it. So we're going to just be adding a second layer of Reikland Fleshshade gloss into the deepest recesses. Okay, so now we've got our base coat done. We've got 2 layers of wash to give us a nice deep recess shade. We're going to start working our way back up to highlights. So we're going to be using rich gold from Pro Acryl here. If you do not have Pro Acryl, the alternative option would be something like Retributor armor from Citadel or Glorious Gold from Vallejo. And yeah, we're just going to be doing an all over dry brush. Any brushes you want, makeup brushes. I'm using an Artist Opus, I think size medium here. And yeah, just going to be dry brushing it all over. The armor here is perfect for dry brushing. There's so many like fine details that pick up really nicely with dry brushing. You've just got to be really careful not to do it too heavy. I see so many people, especially videos on YouTube actually, other people doing videos where they dry brush and there's so much paint on the brush, it obscures so much detail. So just make sure you work it around on a bit of tissue and that most of your paint is off your brush, because the last thing you want to do here is go in too heavy. Then you're going over some of your kind of shade that you've created, and it's going to ruin the whole effect. Next up after that, we're going to be doing another highlight stage using bright gold from Pro Acryl. Really like the metallics from Pro Acryl. I think they're the best on the market, if I'm honest. But if you do want to be using Citadel here, you can use Auric Armor Gold, which is a very similar shade from Citadel. And again, we're going to be going all the way around the model, dry brushing this on really neatly, and just trying to pick out more of the raised areas, like kind of looking for your reflections, and just doing a little bit lighter, trying to leave some of the previous shade. Okay, so next, here is where it's going to get a little bit different. I'm going to be using Skrag Brown, and we're going to start glazing in some deeper shadows. So it's not very commonly seen where you use kind of the standard opaque paints to create glazes over metallics. It's not kind of mega often the technique you see, but it's something I really wanted to do on this. It's a really good way of adding a lot more depth. I wanted it to be somewhere between kind of something which we'd call true metallic, which would be like you basically paint metallics but as if it was non-metallic metal, so you try and create more shades, more shadows, and a little bit of a kind of light source, rather than just directly painting the metallics and letting them do all the work. And then I'm adding in some Rhinox Hide to the mix as well to make some nice deep dark shades. Also, a nice thing is it will start matting down your shadows, so instead of having this really high gloss shadows, it takes away a little bit of the shine, and that's really helpful for the overall effect. And also, after that, we're going to do Agrax Earthshade in the deepest recesses. As you can see, the paint will deposit the most where you leave the brush off the model, so I'm kind of aiming to glaze towards the darkest areas rather than away, so it's depositing the most paint in the darkest areas. As you can see now, we've got a really nice gold effect going on. There's plenty of shading, lots of depth to it, lots of highlights. So now we're going to be a little bit more neat, and we're going to pick out all of the little edge highlights with white gold from Pro Acryl. Again, if you're using the Citadel palette, this can easily be switched out for Liberator Gold, which is a very, very similar shade. This is going to be one of the longest stages, just working your way through all of the metallics there. It's a good kind of hour's work there, getting around all that. After that, we're going to hit the whole model with a coat of matte varnish. There's a lot of different kind of paint textures on here. The Retributor Armour base coat spray is very satin. The Reikland Fleshshade is obviously gloss, and then we've added in more matte paints in the form of a glaze, so just to bring the armour all together and to get rid of some of those kind of different textures and different effects. I'm just going to matte it all down. After that, we're going to go around and pick out some of the gemstones. So this is obviously easier while everything is in sub-assemblies. Some of the gems are behind his cloak, which you'll probably never see, but you know, I'd like to just get them done anyway. Being it's a Primarch and we only tend to paint one, maybe two or three in a lifetime, it's worth doing the extra effort. So we're starting off with the Thousand Suns blue, and we're aiming to paint 3/4 of the gem, leaving the top right hand corner black. Next, after that, we're going to go into Ahriman Blue, and basically we're looking to just highlight the Thousand Suns blue. And then we're going to be doing a third and final line of Baharroth Blue, and then we're going to try our very best to do a tiny little white line underneath the areas we've highlighted, and a little white dot in the top corner to give it a little bit of a reflective look. Once the model is all finished at the end, we'll hit these gems with some gloss varnish. After that, I decided this time to work on some of the red details, so we're going to be picking out the handle of the sword, the little tabard that he's got. We're going to be painting that separately, obviously, to the cloak, and any other red areas. We're starting off with a mix of Evil Sunz Scarlet and Mephiston Red, and then we're going to be adding some coal black from Pro Acryl into that to make a recessed shade. It doesn't have to be Pro Acryl black, it can be any other black, but I do find the coverage and the matte effect of the Pro Acryl is very useful. Next up, we're going to be highlighting the red areas with Evil Sunz Scarlet. We're going to be working all the way around, being as neat as we can to edge highlight that. And then we're going to be going into Wild Rider Red for a really nice sharp edge highlight, as fine as you can do it. Just do your best. And then just some little dots of Ungor Flesh anywhere where you think it looks cool or where you've got areas that join. After the red details, we're going to be adding in our silver metallics. I'm going to be using dark silver from Pro Acryl, one of the best colours in the world ever. There wasn't a huge amount of references here as to what bits to paint silver, so I'm just picking out the bottom of the backpacks, any kind of venting, so like where you've got like the spinny disc looking things, on the ends of the jetpack and the middle of the back. Also picking out bits on the bolt gun. I did pick out the Imperial Eagle here, but I decided in the end to go that gold and just follow the recipe for the other gold areas. Once you've done the dark silver, I've then gone into, I didn't have any Nuln oil, so I used Army Painter's dark tone, which is essentially just Nuln oil, so either or, whatever you've got laying about. I think there's also Pro Acryl do a black shade now, shade or a wash, and again that's probably the same thing, so just do that. And then going as neatly as I can around all of the silver areas with Iron Hand Steel. doing a highlight stage, and then into silver from Pro Acryl, which is really bright. So as you can see here, I'm using it really limited just for some dot and really sharp edge highlights. After that, we're going to go into the cloak. This is one of the biggest kind of parts of the model. You need to make sure that this is looking good. It was what we call zenithal highlighted to start with, so it was sprayed black and then it was sprayed directly from above as the model would be angled with Greyseer. I'm going to go straight into Blood Angel's Red contrast here. You don't need to put it through the airbrush, it would work just as well through a paintbrush, but purely just to save time, being to have the airbrush sitting next to me, it makes sense to use it. But as I said, you definitely don't need to. So you're going to work your way all around that and just make sure and get a nice smooth even base coat. And then again, I'm going to be using Evil Sunz Scarlet through the airbrush, basically trying to follow the zenithal highlights that we had at the start. So just working from above, working my way around. Again, you're more than welcome to do that with a brush. You don't need the airbrush for that at all. It just speed it up for me, being just sitting right next to me. After that, I'm going to be creating a glaze, very thin glaze, probably 5-6 parts water to 1 part paint with Dryad Bark. And I'm going to be working my way around the cloak, adding a glaze to the recesses and just building it up in layers. So some areas here have 5-6 layers of that. And then, adding some Pro Acryl coal black into that mix. And again, using very thin layers. As you can see, I'm moving the brush off the model at the point where I want it to be the darkest, so I'm always trying to pull towards my darkest areas. That's where you would deposit the most pigment, and as you can see here, I'm just dipping straight into the water and feathering that glaze, even though the glaze is already very thin, just trying not to leave any hard edges. And as you can see, it probably took about an hour to get around all of this. But you can see the transitions there are so smooth, it's really worth the time and effort on the cloak. Next up, I'm going to be going around the cloak here with a mix of Evil Sunz Scarlet and Wild Rider Red. I know I've just spent ages trying to get it as smooth as possible, but now I'd like to add some texture to it. It just adds a bit more visual interest. So I'm going to do these little cross hatch patterns. The paint here is really thin actually, it's probably somewhere between a glaze and a layer consistency. So there's probably 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part paint, and as you can see, it's picking up really nicely into the brush. It's making it really easy to do those really fine crisscrosses because the paint is flowing so well. But also as it's drying, because it's so highly diluted, it's not actually making a massive impact of texture. It's really subtle, which is exactly what I was looking for. Next up, I thought I would give a go at some freehand. I just thought I'd do this kind of swirly pattern on here. I'm still not 100% convinced by this, and it may be something at a later date that I go back to, and I might kind of try and go for more of the box art where they've got the white lines and the Imperial eagle. I might repaint that, but yeah, just added some freehand in just for the fun of it. You've got to enjoy these Primarch models. You know, like I said, it's very rare many people paint too many of these. So just enjoy it, add some little extra details, take that a little bit of extra time, make it the centerpiece for your army. You won't regret it. You know, these models are not cheap, and you might as well enjoy the process and do the best you can. Now heading into the last stage for this paint, and also the most important probably, the bit that everyone will look to first, it will be the face. So I'm starting all over the skin with a base tone of Cadian Fleshtone, and as you can see, the paint is really thin here. I'm going to build it up with 2 or 3 really thin layers, purely because I don't want to obscure any detail. The resin here is so fine, it's just worth saving as much of the detail as you can. Before we go any further with the skin, I'm going to do the hair. So I'm dry brushing it all with bold titanium white from Pro Acryl, which over top of the Greyseer is very subtle, but you can definitely see the difference. And then I'm going to do a wash all over with Apothecary White. This is a really great way of painting hair. You've obviously got the grey base coat, the grey wash, and then the white highlights. and it all blends together really nicely. And like I said before, the resin is so well sculpted and the detail is so fine, it picks up really lovely. So we're going to be going onto the skin now, and I'm going to be busting out the magnifying goggles. My eyes are getting a bit tired these days, so I need these to do these tiny little details. The skin tone had an all over wash of Reikland Fleshshade, and I've left that for 20 to 25 minutes to dry. I've made sure I'm getting in all the recesses, including the eye sockets and in the mouth. I'm going to be picking out the teeth with some Ushabti Bone. They're really nicely sculpted actually, the teeth. Once you get the magnifying glass on, you just do your best to pick it out. The other way to do it would be to kind of fill the mouth with Ushabti Bone if you haven't got the kind of eye capabilities or hand capabilities. You would maybe just pick it out completely by filling the mouth up with the bone and then running a shade of like Agrax Earthshade in there just to simplify it a little bit. Obviously the effect won't be quite as good, but if you haven't got the kind of brush control to get in there, that's a good alternative. We're working around the face here, and with Cadian Fleshtone I'm just adding in some basic skin tone from AK, and I'm just adding it into the mix. I'm mixing it on my wet palette and just working it round, adding the highlights. Next up, I've diluted some Screamer Pink into a thin glaze, and it's just adding some kind of slightly different tones into the face. So around the cheeks, a little bit on the forehead, it's just giving it a kind of little bit of a purple, more lifelike hue. And then I'm basically into neat basic flesh tone from AK now. Still very thin paint, as you can see, it's still going on really nice and smooth. And here is the finished face. So I was pretty chuffed with it. I was really chuffed that I managed to get into the eye sockets and stuff. As you can see on the actual finished pictures, I decided to go back into the eye sockets with some dark flesh from Vallejo and just do a couple of glazes in there. It's kind of given his eyes a bit more of a sunken in effect, which I was really going for. I wanted him to look a little bit tired, a little bit battle worn, but also to just take away from them really bright white eyeballs. I did paint his eyeballs off camera because it's a nightmare trying to get them goggles under the camera with the eyes in the right angles and everything. But basically I picked them out with coal black. I then done a nice white eyeball and then tried my hardest to get a nice black dot right in the centre of the eyes and make sure they were both facing the same way so he didn't look too goofy. So all that was left to do now was to assemble the model. I've left all the pins in that I used for the sub-assemblies, and I drilled holes into the model to try and give it plenty of support to avoid any breakages, because the last thing you want is like things like the cloak breaking off and peeling off layers of paint when it goes, which can be common with resin, so that would be an absolute nightmare. So yeah, pinned everything in to avoid that. I've assembled the model. I hope you've all enjoyed the video. I hope you've learnt something. Please feel free to comment if there's anything you think I could do better with these videos in the future, or if there's anything you'd like to see. Yeah, this is the start of an Imperial Fist series, so I'm now going to hopefully follow this up with 3 or 4 other videos painting Horus Heresy 30k Imperial Fists. And in the words of Squidmar, all that's left to do is
the Grand Reveal!